I think that's if it, like I had to look at this and like take one thing away. It's exciting that Call of Duty is going to take like a chance, you know, because this could flop, and we kind of everybody kind of knows that it could flop because Caldera flopped. Like I think going into Caldera, we just assumed that new map like there was no way it could suck. But there's also some reward for them too. Like they could drop a really good update. They could drop a really good update, and I think a lot, everybody has a pretty short attention span when it comes to things like that. Where like a lot of bad updates, I think would be forgiven if they do a good job here. YouTube, welcome to the channel. I'm Mr. Shinnister. Today we're going to be talking about Fortune's Keep, the new Rebirth map that just got announced. The overhead view of the map was just released today. We're going to just take you through all of the POIs real quick. The first POI we're going to talk about, we're going to start on the eastern coast of the map, is Camp. This, as far as area-wise to me, seems like it's going to be about the size of the whole tent space that is just outside of living quarters. See, we've got 5 buildings here and some open area to play in. I don't think this is a heavily contested area, and it seems, as far as elevation wise, it seems on the lower end of the map. One of the big things you can notice just in general about this east coast is it all seems to be like downhill. You can see cliff walls here, you can see cliff walls here. So it seems like it's also a little bit lower than the rest of the map. Not as heavily dense as some of the other areas as far as buildings that we're going to see. This area right above it, it's actually, I think, kind of interesting because even though it doesn't look like we've got a lot of stuff here, it seems like something that if the developers want to go in and add a POI at some point, it seems like an area they can touch up and add to. On top of that, we've got the bay on the northeast side of the map. The bay seems like a kind of maybe low intense drop. The only reason I can see this being that way, like just off the bat, you can see there's only looks like there's like 2 or 3 ways up these giant cliff walls. Doesn't look like you'll be able to scale this. And, even if you can, knowing like the way Call of Duty kind of works as far as scaling cliffs, it's going to be difficult, time consuming. This kind of seems like an area where you could drop and potentially be fish in a barrel for another team. Does look like they've got an island out here that has a dock on it. So like, I believe that most of the water in the like contained inside of the red is going to be playable, just like it is in Caldera. The big, most dense area on the east side of the map is the Winery. The Winery looks like it's uphill. You can kind of see these like tiered slopes. This could be walls, but I think it is uphill. And one of the reasons is like, obviously wineries for the most part have like cellars. I think there's going to be a lot of interconnectivity in these buildings, some underground tunnels, things like that. I would imagine that this bigger portion of the building is either very open or it's 3 stories. I think we're going to see a bunch of 2-story buildings here or like warehouse units, along with some underground tunnels here. It looks like like the most interesting part of the east side of the map. Also looks like we could potentially have like some underground here into the tunnels, just based off of like what we can see from the overhead. The very bottom of the map, we have Lighthouse. This area actually kind of troubles me a little bit. I think one of the most frustrating parts of Rebirth at the moment, like one of the areas that we would say we would change, is probably the lighthouse that currently sits and looks over most of the map. I think the troubling thing here is that you do on this side of the map, it's less dense with buildings, so you have a lot of open area. So getting to the top of this lighthouse, respawning in, would be a very strong position on this map. Going into the middle of the map, we have on the south side, the Smugglers Cove. This area actually seems kind of reminiscent of areas we've played in Caldera, where we've got some buildings on little islands and the surrounding water is more than likely walkable. Doesn't appear like there's any bridges in between these. So this is, again, kind of an open area. I think the tough thing here is you look and you can only see a couple of ways up. And obviously, like, this giant building next to it overlooks these islands. So I don't necessarily think this is like a destination drop. Going a little bit north, we've got the direct middle of the map. This area is actually kind of interesting. You can see we've got what looks to be like some kind of construction area. Couple of buildings. Looks like an unfinished plot of land. You can see these truck beds. This could be just like Control Center was before, where there is construction going on, and at some point, before Warzone 2, they add another POI here. I think that would be interesting. But I don't hate how the middle of the map has some buildings, but it is kind of open too. Looks like there will be a lot of cover to play through. And we know that zones, you know, more often than not, the middle of the zone, the middle of the map will be in the zone for a long time. Going north of that, we have the gatehouse. Gatehouse, and in fact, everything north of the gatehouse, I'm very hesitant to be excited about. I think that this will be a big, big, fun area, super hot drop. You can see we've got these walls that kind of surround terraces and the keep, and technically, I guess, the gatehouse. I kind of think that these will be like the walls just outside of headquarters that overlook Stronghold, where they're low walls. I don't think that there'll be walls that you can't scale that kind of force players to take only one open entrance. These buildings, I imagine, are like at least 3 stories apiece. They look big, and they basically hold everything inside of them. I can see this just being problematic as far as rotations come, where, you know, you have a situation where one of the big complaints in Rebirth is a lot of hand holding and teams holding buildings. And it seems like a lot of areas of this map kind of play into that. But if the sightlines are done well, potentially it's just a fun building to building combat. Going to the very northern point of the map, we have the keep. The keep looks like it's going to be this giant building, kind of like this open middle that you can drop into. I think this is going to be the superstore of the map. I don't think many people would probably question that. It looks like one giant building, probably tons of loot, tons of fighting. I think the one, like, maybe scary or worrisome issue is that when you have on a smaller map an area like this where tons of teams are going to go, it has the potential to really break up the flow of the game if you have, say, half of the teams get eliminated right out of the gate. Now, granted, with things like the resurgence mechanic where you can come back, you know, and respawn and keep fighting, potentially this is just a really good time for everybody that drops there. I don't know. If 80% of the lobby starts dropping in this northern side, will that make for fun games for the rest of the teams? Hard to say at this point. We'll have to see how they do things like circle rotation timing and how many players that they allow in this map, because this map, and you can kind of get the gist from just looking at some of the size of these buildings, this map is bigger than Rebirth. And even if it's not a 1-to-1, like even if these boxes don't necessarily match up with Rebirth's boxes, you can tell just based on the size of the buildings, this map's going to be a little bit bigger. Certainly also one of the more dense areas as far as buildings go. We've got the terraces next to the keep. This kind of seems like just a continuation of the keep in the sense that there's several big buildings here, all kind of insulated by the gatehouse walls. This area will either be really, really fun, or this will be areas that like are frustrating to play through. Going back into the middle, and the only site that we didn't touch on, in the middle west, we have the Grotto. If this is a big dip, I think this is a mistake. If it's like just a small dip that kind of goes into a valley, I think that's fine. The thing is, we talked about middle of the map tends to be an area that you have to rotate through at some point, because like the middle map is just always going to somehow be in a circle. And I think the tough thing here is if this is too big of a, you know, a drop, this becomes a hard place to rotate out of or have to rotate through. Ultimately, we'll see how it plays. Starting in the northeast, we have the graveyard. We've seen how the graveyard plays in Verdansk, back when Verdansk was, you know, in its heyday. Has the potential for fun fighting if it's anything like the Verdansk that was south of Superstore. I think the tough thing here is you can see that there's all these little mausoleums that could potentially be spots where teams just kind of post up and hold. South of that, we've got the town. This is the most dense area on the map as far as strictly buildings go. This area kind of looks like it would be difficult to rotate into. I would imagine in a circle that moves towards the east, you have a lot of teams holding buildings, and it's either going to create for really fun house-to-house combat, like you have in some of the smaller buildings like Grandma's house in Rebirth, or this is going to lead to very frustrating teams holding windows, camping real hard, sitting and holding angles. On the south point of the map, you have the Overlook, which I assume is just one kind of big building that overlooks the town a little bit, but really overlooks this cliffside. Again, this kind of feels just like an extension of the town to me, except maybe with like tiered walk up. This could potentially be a place that looks into the town and again makes rotations through the town difficult. There is some construction going on just to the east of it. This could potentially become something new, something fun. depending on what they decide to do with it. Looking at the map as a whole and some final thoughts, I think it's exciting they're doing something new. I think they're taking a risk because Rebirth is not the game type that I think most people complain about. I don't think it necessarily needed a touch up, but anytime we get something new and some big content drop in Call of Duty, like that's something to be excited about because they don't do a lot of it. Ultimately, I think we'll have to see how this plays, and I'm sure there will be growing pains where they make some adjustments to player count, they make some adjustments to the circle timing, and maybe even some little adjustments on different POIs. But if they do that, they listen to feedback, which you never know. I think this is a good change. We'll see what happens. Guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.